now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if my neighborhood is susceptible to flooding, would my ultra-tight swimwear count as a tax write-off? And will Kanye West's new album celebrate his musical genius and also his totally obvious mental instability? And now, the podcast host who would gladly replace Al Roker as the on-the-scene hurricane reporter, Pete Dominic.
Yeah, that is right. I would, Pete. I would do that. If they asked me to do that, I would do that. But I do also want to say that nobody should be doing that. We are far past the point where we needed to subject a human to those conditions to illustrate them to those of us watching around the world. You don't need to send a guy out there. Someone's going to get injured, and it's not going to be fun anymore. I can't believe they haven't already gotten hit by a flying piece of metal and chopped their head off. I mean, it's idiotic. I love Al Roker. I hate seeing him in danger. Period. I want him in a studio that is at the temperature of his liking at all times. And I want him given fed grapes by servants. I want him to be massaged, and I want him to live forever. That's how I feel. Now, Al still wants to be out there, so I also want what Al wants. But yeah. Well, anyway, I hope that you are doing okay, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. I've got an awesome conversation with infectious disease expert Dr. Meghan May. And then before that, I've got Tim Wise on his latest, and amazing, as always, two great guest experts joining me as they do almost every day. And I've got some news for you that I want to share, a short news segment today. Spent last night on a 3-hour Zoom with local folks talking about our efforts on diversity and inclusion initiatives in our town, as we are seeing a lot of folks that are so far way out there that they're not only yelling and screaming about CRT, critical race theory, they're also talking about it's derivatives, diversity and inclusion. We don't want that programming. Enough. There's enough. I mean, they're really mad. I don't know. I don't always know what they're scared of. I do want to try to get to the bottom of that. So if you or someone you know is worried about diversity and inclusion programming and protocols in your school district, then let me know. If you are involved in those protocols, let me know that too. Maybe you can talk to the group that we're forming. So, well, had a 3-hour Zoom. It was really great to see all these amazing folks that lived in my community that I really didn't even know. I don't know most of them, and it was great to get introduced to them and to start the important work that we all need to be doing locally. Whether you have a school-age kid or not, these groups are starting to form. I highly recommend that you get involved and get on board, as I have also still considering the run for Ward 2. I mean, haven't made an official announcement, but I see no reason not to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's right. Looks like I'm running. I mean, again, it's not official, but you guys are listeners of this podcast, and part of it, so many of you have become friends and supporters, and I just feel like I'm in a community with you, and so I always want to keep you up to date with what I'm doing, and so if you have ideas and advice and skill sets, I've already gotten so much from so many of you on running for town council. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at standupwithpete@gmail.com. Getting all your emails. Sorry I haven't responded to all of them. Tough to always keep up with the correspondence and host, edit, book, and produce a full-length podcast every single day. But I'm loving being busy. I'm loving all I'm doing, and I'm going to continue to put everything I've got into the show, so don't worry about that. I've got some new exciting things I'm going to be announcing for this show to partner with it soon. So I'll let you know as soon as I get those more developed, but they're coming. So very excited about all that, and I'm going to continue to share the details about what it's like to run for office. That's part of why I want to do this. The odds of me winning are really low. It's a write-in campaign. It was too late to get my name on the ballot. They came to me, by the way. I didn't go to them, and they came to me, and they said, would you be interested in running? I was like, yeah. Then they found out, oh, my gosh, it's too late to get your name on the ballot. Would you? And then the idea came up to do a write-in, and I said, what? Let's do it. What do we got to lose? So I appreciate your support, and I'll talk more about it as it develops, but I'm going to keep you in the loop because I think it's really interesting to learn how a campaign comes together. So I'll just say right now, I'm just doing a bunch of listening and probably a little too much talking with some of the folks I'm talking to, but I'm really mostly listening about this town, its demographics, its problems, the solutions offered, the history, the players, the policies, the corruption, the gossip, the rumors. There's just so much to learn from people who have been involved in trying to create positive change for years, and as well as people who have tried to document what has happened, but like everywhere else in the country, local media, local journalists telling the stories of what happens at the town level, they're waning at the city level, even at the local level, at the local state government level. So it's always hard to kind of, get through it all and sift through it all, but that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And mostly I'm just meeting amazing, awesome people in my community that I didn't already know. So I'm loving getting involved, and I would love to hear your stories of getting involved and more active in your communities as well. Many of you have been involved your whole lives and careers, and I am inspired by you because you've shared those stories with me, and I follow you and stand up with you. So thank you very much for sharing that with me, and I'm going to continue to share that journey as I go through it. All right, so now let me get to the news because there is a lot to get to. Headlines galore. It's time for the last 24. Yes, the U.S. completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan. Also, we averaged more than 100,000 COVID-19 hospitalizations a day over the last week. The first time, I think, since, January? Yeah, the highest 7-day average since mid-January when nearly 140,000 people were hospitalized. The Education Department opened 5 civil rights investigations into statewide school mask bans. And the House Select Committee investigating the January 6 riot plans to ask telecommunications companies to preserve the phone records of several Republican lawmakers who participated in the Stop the Steal rally. Just a quick rundown of some of the top headlines I'm following. Get to some more rapid-fire headlines in the news dump, but a few things I also wanted to play for you. Here is Tucker Carlson last night. Sorry, you got to hear this guy. Very short. He had a Republican congressman on, and they were talking about how concerned they are about Afghan refugees coming into America and posing terrorist threats. But Tucker Carlson was a little more concerned just about the Afghan people coming here and being likely to vote for Democrats. And that's what he's really just worried about, right? To, replace us.
And be vetted there. And then if they get through the vetting, they should be able to come in. Because 84% of the people that in the first quarter of this year that tried to get an SIV in Afghanistan, they were rejected. Only 16% were able to get in. There has to be a thorough vetting process. The Biden administration is circumventing it.
Yeah, they're just using a crisis to change our country. They'll never lose another election. That's the point, as you know. Congressman, thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Just using a crisis to change our country. To change our country to what? I met an Afghan in Washington, D.C. the other night, and if you know any folks from Afghanistan, I'm sure that you like them. They're amazing folks, and they want to be in this country, and I'm just not quite sure what else matters. I'm not sure what else folks are worried about other than change, diversity, new folks coming in, and that's exactly what Tucker Carlson, of course, was articulating. Now, here is Mitch McConnell saying he's so surprised that a lot of people didn't want to get vaccinated. He really didn't think that was going to be an issue.
Honestly, my friends, it never occurred to me that we'd have a challenge getting people to take the vaccine. But that's where we are. 90% of the people in the hospitals are unvaccinated. We have a crisis of the unvaccinated. And so we're all, I think, perplexed as to how we tackle this problem. But clearly, getting more and more Americans vaccinated is the only way to end it.
Well, when he is right, he's right, huh? At least what the solution is. But the fact that he is astonished, or at least feigning ignorance, that we're going to have a challenge from folks who don't trust government or scientists or pilots. I don't know. Anybody who's good at a thing, who's smart. It's crazy that he is acting like he didn't They didn't expect this. Here is the governor of West Virginia now. This is Jim Justice.
640 hospitalized and 203 in the ICU units, and probably others out within our state that are not well. We're going to continue to read death after death after death if we don't get ourselves vaccinated.
Here now is the evil governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, taking a page from the Trump COVID playbook about the cases spiking among children, saying, maybe we're doing too many tests. That's all.
So I think as the whole back to school stuff and some of that testing goes, I think you'll start to see, I actually think it's going down in the school age kids. I just think that they're testing so much that the numbers are being held, but the percent positive I do think is going down.
Oh, is that what you think? Okay, well, we don't care what you think. We care what the experts in the science who aren't political think. The other night at that board meeting when people started yelling that the doctors were political, I really do want to get to the bottom of that. And here now is the governor of Louisiana on both Hurricane Ida and COVID.
We had 4 hurricanes last year during COVID, but we had a small fraction of the number of people in our hospitals that we currently have. We have more people in the hospital today, 2,450 with COVID, than we had at any point before this current surge. And when Hurricane Laura hit last year, we only had about 300 in the hospitals. So evacuating hospitals is not going to be possible because there's nowhere to bring those patients to. There's no excess capacity anywhere else in the state or outside the state. And so we're really worried about prolonged power outages.
Yeah, Louisiana is in bad shape right now. And folks, if you're listening down there, I hope you're okay. I've heard from both Barksdale and Jason Moe, and I'm trying to think if there's any other Louisiana listeners or has been hit by this hurricane. Hopefully you're okay. We had the most rain I've seen in a very long time come down in a very short period of time here in New York. So that was pretty crazy weather event. Anybody else deal with that? I was driving my daughter to her middle school because she wanted to decorate her locker, and that was the 1 hour I got to spend with her today. And so we went over there in a driving rainstorm, and it was nuts. Crazy. Weather's crazy. All right, here now, I want to play this back and forth with NBC's Peter Alexander and Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, who I think does a great job. I don't love all of these reporters making these binary situations when it comes to the longest war in American history ending. I did not love his questions. I also don't love her using, and other administration officials using the phrase retrograde. We lost and we had to get out of there. We did cut and run. Call it whatever you want. We got our asses kicked. All of us. Not only the members of the military who never could have won the war in Afghanistan because it's not their war to win, just like every other military that ever fought there, but the rest of us too. Our reputations, the amount of money we spent there, which we could have done so many amazing things here, and just horrible, just a horrible disaster as it has always been. I'm going to take a moment to say, by the way, I've always been right, only because I listen to the rightest people. It's not that hard, in my opinion. You just keep listening to the people who keep predicting the things that are going to happen, and stop listening to the people who say, well, we're going to win here, or whatever they say. That doesn't happen. The opposite happens. It's not that hard. Not Democrat, not Republican, not liberal or conservative. The foreign policy experts who basically predict, if you do this, this is going to happen. It'll be a disaster. You can't win an insurgency. You never have. Those are the people I've been interviewing for over 12 years on these issues. And they all were telling you years and years ago on this show that there's no way for us to win militarily or any of the main initiatives that we're fighting. And this concern of this new threat of terrorism is so ridiculous and overplayed, and there's no evidence of it. There's actually, I'm sorry for editorializing here for so long, but I'm so fired up about this, and I do have a lot to say about it. There's way more evidence that they fought us because we were there. Bin Laden attacked America because of American military forces in Muslim countries. We could argue about whether or not they should be there, but that's why he did it. And then we went there, and then we created more radicals by torturing them, by launching night raids, and as so many Marines have told me, rummaging through people's dressers, barging in their homes. And imagine if some foreign soldier who didn't speak your language came into your home and looked through your child's drawers and took your husband and military-age kids away. Imagine these night raids, the torture, the war crimes, which we know about, where American members of the American military were court-martialed and went to jail that we prosecuted. There's always going to be war crimes. The indefinite detention, the drone attacks, the promises that were unkept. I mean, so many of the terrorists were recruited because we were there, because of our actions. Well, what would you have us do, Pete? Not send an occupying military of heavily armed people with all kinds of weaponry into another country to sit there for 20 years. Yeah, we knew this was going to end this way. We always knew, and we should have known, and we did know before because of Vietnam and because of the Soviet Union and the British before them in Afghanistan. Okay, I think that rant is over for now. And let's just listen back to the very last part of it where I just went, ah! Here we go. Here's that. Because of one more time. Such an idiot. Because of ugh. Okay, so here's Peter Alexander and Jen Psaki.
Did the U.S. accomplish its objective, knowing that there will be likely thousands of SIV applicants and others still there, and certainly some Americans as well? Did we achieve our objective?
I think first we have to date evacuated more than 120,000 people. That's 120,000 lives that we have saved, including 6,000 Americans and their families, many of them dual nationals. And we are continuing. Our commitment is enduring to Afghan partners, to American citizens who may not have decided to leave. That is their right to determine when they want to leave. That commitment is enduring. But we have saved more than 120,000 lives, and I would let you evaluate for yourself. Go ahead.
When we talk about as the U.S. prepares to leave, whether tonight or tomorrow, there are going to be billions of dollars worth of U.S.-made munitions, arms, military aircraft, armored vehicles that have fallen into the hands of the Taliban here, giving them new capabilities they didn't have before this.
Let me just jump in here and say I think that's a terrible question. I mean, we left them small arms. I actually have no idea what I'm talking about, but I would be shocked if I found out we left them shoulder launch missiles, Sting, what are they called? Those missiles that you can shoot down helicopters with. There's several different types of them. I'd be really astonished if we left them a bunch of fighter jets or helicopters. I don't think we did any of that. I don't think we left them any kind of weapons more than guns, and we left them a lot of logistical stuff, vehicles and communication stuff, and I'm sure we were going to resupply them with ammunition and the spare parts they needed. But I just thought there was come on, you tell me if I'm right here, if you're in the military, or if I mean, I got to find out the answer. But that sounds like a stupid question to me. But here's how Jen Psaki handled it.
Are Americans less safe now because the Taliban now has access to billions of dollars worth of American-made weaponry?
Well, let me unpack your question a little bit, because the U.S. military, part of their retrograde effort is to reduce the amount of military equipment or apparatus that anyone on the ground has access to. I'm not going to get into the details of how they do that, but that is part of their effort. I will also reiterate something that our National Security Advisor said just last week. We had to make an assessment several weeks ago about whether we provide materials to the Afghan National Security Forces so that they could fight the fight. Obviously, they decided not to fight or not, and we made the decision to provide them with that equipment and the material. The third piece I would note that's very important here is that we have not assessed that any group on the ground, whether it's ISIS-K or the Taliban, has the ability to attack the United States. Whoa. We clearly need to, sorry, that was an aggressive bug. We need to ensure that remains the case, but that is not a capability that we have assessed to be the case at this point in time. There's a difference between the threat that is posed to U.S. men and women serving or people who are gathering outside of the gates in Kabul and whether these individuals can attack the United States.
So I guess, but in simple questions, acknowledging that you're going to try to limit what access they do have to some of the weaponry in ways that you can't communicate here. But at the end of the day, whether it's not the United States, it's under risk as a function of this are Americans around the globe. I mean, are Western interests now more at risk because the Taliban has new access to all this weaponry?
Well, again, Peter, I would say that the world will be watching. We have an enormous amount of leverage, including access to the global marketplace, which is not a small piece of leverage to the Taliban, who are now overseeing large swaths of Afghanistan. Certainly, our objective was not to leave them with any equipment, but that is not always an option when you are looking to retrograde and move out of a war zone. But that is our clear leverage we have with the Taliban. And again, our capacities are over-the-horizon capacities, which, by the way, killed 2 ISIS terrorists just last week and continue to be utilized by our men and women on the ground, remain in place and remain in place in the region. There are other parts of the world, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, where we don't have a presence on the ground, and we still prevent terrorist attacks or threats to U.S. citizens living in the United States or around the world from growing.
This last one, then I'll share with the next person. Is the U.S. more or less safe today than we were before the Taliban took over?
Well, again, we are not going to do anything that's going to allow terrorists to grow or prosper in Afghanistan or any terrorist organization. That continues to be the president's commitment, and his order to his U.S. military over the past several days and the actions that CENTCOM have announced show that he's going to deliver on that promise. Go ahead.
I don't even wait.
All right, Jen Psaki, I think. All right, well, I think Jen Psaki handled it pretty well, even though I don't like some of the language. Over the horizon, I mean, she's talking about drones and different capabilities from the sky, as well as space, not to mention the retrograde. I just didn't love that kind of military speak. It's like collateral damage. No, it's dead people. Okay, so I also want to play for you. Here is the commander in charge of U.S. Central Command and the Afghan withdrawal. His name is Kenneth McKenzie, and here he is yesterday.
Look, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out. But I think if we'd stayed another 10 days, Louis, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out that we wanted to get out. And there still would have been people who would have been disappointed with that. It's a tough situation. But I want to emphasize again that simply because we have left, that doesn't mean the opportunities for both Americans that are in Afghanistan that want to leave and Afghans who want to leave, they will not be denied that opportunity. I think our Department of State is going to work that very hard in the days and weeks ahead.
And then there's this clip from Richard Engel, who is one of the top foreign correspondents, who's been reported from almost every conflict zone around the world. And I think he's always been a really good reporter in terms of trying to tell us what's happening on the ground, even talking about what the different interests and political interests and human rights and conflicts are leading to. But increasingly, in my opinion, his editorializing has just been inaccurate and, in my personal opinion, unwelcome at this point because he seems to leave so much out. But he got a lot of criticism online yesterday for this short piece of commentary, talking about how it's the greatest capitulation of Western values. Take a listen.
A larger group of Islamist fighters pushed out the United States. So are we going to see the next Osama bin Laden learning the lesson of what is happening right now? The worst capitulation of Western values in our lifetimes. You left behind. I went to Afghanistan. I arrived a couple of weeks ago. It was a republic backed by the United States, backed by the West. Now it is an emerging Islamic emirate trying to find its way.
My friend Michael Cohen, columnist Michael Cohen, who joins me often, said about that commentary, it's, quote, so beyond irresponsible, both historically inaccurate and completely inappropriate editorializing from a news reporter. Richard Engel getting a lot of criticism for that yesterday. And what else can I play for? I mean, I'll be talking a lot more about Afghanistan, but I really think that so much has been, I don't know, I guess I'm disappointed in a lot of the people whose analysis I generally respect. I'm not disappointed in them. I just disagree with people like my friend Paul Rieckhoff, my friend Julia Yaffe, who I really like, Jill Filipovich, I think has been off the mark on some of this. And I think these are all brilliant, awesome people with a lot of credibility. And I just disagree. I'm still mostly in the camp of the Andrew Baceviches, the Matthew Hoes, the Dave Rothkopfs, and a lot of other folks like that. Robert Wright, I've been listening to him. definitely check out his interview with Ezra Klein on the Ezra Klein podcast. I thought that was a really brilliant conversation. I'm going to try to get him on the show as well. All right, and a couple more clips I want to play for you. Here is former Fox News analyst who was also like a New York Post columnist. I used to think this guy was a crazy right-winger, and to see how far the conversation has moved from him, here is retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. He was such a staunch critic of Obama's, and here he is criticizing and describing working as a Fox News military analyst during the Trump administration in a new expose by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Here's just a little clip of Ralph Peters.
The green room over the last several years into the Trump administration, when I left, the guests got more and more bizarre, more distasteful. The green room started to be like the bar scene in the first Star Wars film.
Oh, my God.
And these people are freaks. And then you realize you're one of the freaks.
What do you mean by freaks?
People with no qualifications, who could not even speak cogently, who could only speak the lines they'd memorized, praising Trump as though he were a heathen god that had to be appeased with slavish rhetoric.
Former Fox News military analyst Ralph Peters. I want to see that documentary. That sounds pretty good. All right. Well, those are all the clips I got for you. So much more to talk about and play, of course. Always send me whatever you got to share with the group. It's just one of many ways you can stand up and support the program, to send me stuff. Always appreciate it. standupwithpete@gmail.com. But now it's time for the rest of the headlines, everything else I can find in a rapid-fire style. It's called the News Dump. Hit it, Pete.
Landscaper working nearby beehive in a clump. Too bad they're murder hornets on today's news dump.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Let me just tell you, that is the first news dump or intro I've ever edited of Pete Coase, because he kept the bee sound on too long. I took it down like a couple seconds. I couldn't take those bees. I didn't want to haunt you either. Sorry, Pete. It was too many bees for too long. I took it down a little bit. All right, let's see what we got here for today's news dump. Let's start with something scary from the FBI, who reporting that hate crimes rose 6% over 2019 numbers. Hate crimes are rising in the U.S. according to the FBI. Reports are 6% from 2019. I think I just said that twice. Fewer agencies are participating in the count, however. 7,759 hate crimes reported in 2020. Data sent the FBI said more than 15,000 law enforcement agencies across the country reporting to this. 2,755 crimes targeting black people, 274 crimes targeting Asian people. And the Stop AAPI Hate said its online portal logged 6,603 hate incidents against Asian people since March 2020. This stuff is very difficult to keep track of, but those numbers alone are probably wildly inaccurate because most of these crimes do not get reported. But still, hate crimes rising to the highest level in 12 years amid increasing attacks on black and Asian people, according to the FBI. That's the headline at the Washington Post. So don't tell me that racism is over. No, it's getting worse. It's not getting better at the moment. I think that's fair to say. I mean, it depends on how you measure it, but in terms of hate crimes, it's getting worse. Lightning strikes at the Jersey Shore and killed a lifeguard. I usually don't like to report like these kinds of death stories, but this storm was crazy, and it is worth mentioning that lightning does kill. It can kill you. New Jersey authorities said a young lifeguard was killed and 7 other people were injured when lightning struck a Jersey Shore beach on Monday afternoon, marking the second death of a young lifeguard at the Jersey Shore in a little over a week, which puts lifeguarding in a category of danger, I think. I don't know. Sometimes we think the wrong jobs are the most dangerous jobs. Where's lifeguarding land? Okay, what else do I have for you? Despite a few high-profile conservation success stories, like the dramatic comeback of bald eagle populations in North America, guess what, folks? Birds of prey are in decline worldwide. A new analysis of data from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Bird Life International found that 30% 557 raptor species worldwide are considered near threatened, vulnerable, or endangered, or critically endangered. 18 species are critically endangered, including the Philippine eagle, the hooded vulture, and the Annabin Scopes owl, according to the researchers. I've never heard of any of them. Okay, so moving on, still terrible news. The PNC Bank is the latest large U.S. financial services company to increase wages. This is a good news story, folks. In a bid to keep and attract employees, raising its minimum wage to $18 an hour while also giving higher paid workers a bump in pay. That is the PNC Bank raising their base wages to $18 an hour, the latest bank to do so. And that comes from the efforts of activists and senators like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and other progressives. I think it's pretty fair to say. Americans could be banned from some European vacations after the EU is recommending its members halt non-essential travel from the U.S. due to the pandemic. My wife is planning to go to Sicily to visit her family in October and to take care of some business, and she really wants to go, and I really hope that her trip to Sicily doesn't get canceled. And finally, another good news story. A man apparently survived 10 days aboard a makeshift raft. You've got to see it. It looks like styrofoam connected to some metal. And a good Samaritan is being credited with saving the life of a man who survived 10 days aboard this makeshift raft, reportedly departed from Cuba. The man, who was found in Biscayne Bay, south of Miami, says he had 3 companions with him who perished along the way. The Good Samaritan reported the man around 1 p.m. Saturday, and Coast Guard Station Miami Beach responded. So that is a good news story to end on. That is your news dump. And now it is time to get to my first guest. Very excited to have him joining me. He's an anti-racism educator. He's the author of 9 books, including Dispatches from the Race Wars, most recent book, a collection of his essays. And you got to read him at timjwise.medium.com. I'm always encouraging him to do more video, more audio, more everything, and he's ramping up for more of that. You can support him on patreon.com/speakoutwithtimwise, and he's on Twitter as well, at TimJacobWise. It's always a great conversation with him, and coming up, a great one with Dr. Meghan May. But let's get it started with Tim Wise. All right, so I've got Tim Wise now, and I'm so glad that I do. Your writing has always been great, but I really love your latest stuff, and I'm psyched to talk with you about it. Thank you for joining me.
You bet.
So I told you about the board meeting. You've seen these headlines all over. Sure. What is the best thing that we can say to counter these people who are terrified of these issues around race that they're calling CRT, that they're now saying also they want to get rid of diversity and inclusion in my town? How do we who want to go up to that microphone, or how do we also organize? What can we do to counter this crazy wave of ignorance, arrogance, and racism?
You know, I wish I had a clear, snappy, silver bullet answer for you. But, you know, what we're seeing right now, and I think it's true with the anti-CRT folks, or really, you know, what we should just call the historical accuracy folks. And we're seeing it with the anti-vax folks too, is we're talking about people who by and large are 10 steps over the line of being able to rationally discuss or debate these things. I mean, there are certainly people out there who you could have an informed discussion about critical race theory with, and maybe have disagreements about various things. There are certainly people who have reasonable, I think incorrect, but reasonable positions on, you know, the ubiquity or the non-ubiquity of racism in the modern era, whatever. Like, I mean, you know, there are people you can have that debate with, but the kind of folks who are showing up at these meetings, not only in your town, but, you know, next to us in Nashville is Williamson County, very conservative, very affluent, Republican heavy area. And they're the ones that really sort of kicked a lot of this craziness off with, you know, that they were screaming and yelling a month and a half ago or so about, you know, this book, Meet Ruby Bridges, which is a child's book about Ruby Bridges, who was a black girl who integrated New Orleans public schools in like 1960. There's that, famous Norman Rockwell painting of the black girl being brought into the school by the marshals, and they're throwing tomatoes at the, at the wall, and the N-word, I think, is scrawled. Well, it's a famous painting, right? It's Norman Rockwell, for God's sake. And so teaching about Ruby Bridges in I think it was like a 4th or 5th grade class. It's a really good children's book. And these parents were losing their mind. They're saying, this is terrible. This doesn't offer redemption for white people. It makes white children feel guilty. So in other words, they didn't critique the accuracy. They didn't say, oh, this book is wrong or presents the wrong image of what happened. No, it's 100% accurate. And they just 100% don't want children to know it. Now, how do you respond to that? Well, you don't respond to it with reason and rationality, because they're beyond that. That's why this is the same people that are taking, ivermectin, because they think that, stuff that you're supposed to give horses is good for.
Well, sometimes when someone says these are the same people, I'll say, that's not fair. You don't know that. I'm sure there are some of the people, but Tim, this guy came up and spoke on the microphone and suggested the Board of Education look into ivermectin. Then he came up later and spoke out against CRT. What you just said is accurate based on my own personal experience with this one guy. Same guy.
Yeah. Well, and again, obviously they're not all the same people, but the overlap and the lack of openness to real discussion, it makes it very, very hard to say, well, here's what you do. I think the only real strategy is we have to outpopulate them at these meetings, and we have to make sure that those persons who are committed to teaching history accurately and having these difficult and important conversations about issues like racism in the modern era and the relationship of the past to the present, we have to go to those meetings. We have to show up in numbers that are equal to or greater. You just have to out-organize them. You have to literally defeat them, not necessarily by converting them. This is not about, I'm going to go and convert the heathen, to my way of thinking. It's about saying to all those people who are sitting on the sidelines right now, who I think are the bigger group by far, not the ones who were, screaming about CRT, and not the ones who are defending it or defending anti-racist education, but the people that are just sort of sitting back, and maybe they're posting occasionally on social media, but they're not really talking to their friends, talking to their neighbors, talking to, whomever, their colleagues about pushing back on this. And that's where the debate has to happen. It's with those people who are sort of sitting on the sidelines watching it all. So it's about mobilization and maybe a little inoculation, right? Inoculating people against the craziness by talking to people who are not already in that bunch, not already that far gone, but who just don't understand what's really being taught in school. And, the examples that I like to point out are the Ruby Bridges example, or, folks in Idaho that got up on the microphone and were upset about To Kill a Mockingbird, for God's sake, right? It's like one of the classics of the American literary canon. Now, there is a critique, I should point out, of To Kill a Mockingbird that black folks have had for a long time, which is that it's a white hero narrative. That's an interesting criticism and conversation we could have. But the idea that in Idaho was not that. They weren't saying, it's really unfortunate that Atticus Finch is the hero and black people just sort of sit in the courtroom and watch him. No, that wasn't their critique. Their critique was, this makes white people think that black people were oppressed. Well, if you can't even accept that black people were oppressed in 1930s Alabama, we're in pretty bad shape, right? So I think we've got to be pointing out some of these absurdities and not getting into, because it's not about critical race theory, as we've talked about before. And the people, Chris Rufo and the people that launched the attack, have admitted it's not, they don't even know what critical race theory is. I mean, Chris Rufo said on the interview that he did with Joy Reid, his words were, I don't give a shit about critical race theory, what it really is. So they're admitting that. They just don't want any conversation about issues of equity. That, they're passing around these memes that are like, if you hear the word diversity or inclusion or equity or any of those are just code for critical race theory. So they really just want to shut down all conversation about racial inequity. Yeah. And I think that's the point that we have to come back to over and over again. What is it that they are afraid of children learning? Especially because I think we know the answer to that, and I've written about it, which is the reason they don't want kids to learn about injustice is not because it's going to make them feel guilty or make them feel ashamed or any of that. That's not it. They don't want children to learn about injustice because children have an innate sense of justice. And when young people learn about folks getting shit on, whether that's 100 years ago or 100 minutes ago, children instinctively know that that's wrong and want to do something about it. So what they're really trying to do is make sure kids don't learn about injustice, not because injustice isn't real, not because injustice is some hoax concocted by the left, but because they know damn good and well that if children knew the truth, they would be lost to their right-wing inanity forever.
Although, and you wrote a great, I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but you wrote a great piece about this. I'm trying to get back to see the title, but we talked about it either, the last time we spoke or the time before. But specifically, what you're hearing a lot of people say is that I don't want my kids, you're making my kids feel bad about who they are. They feel bad about being white. I think I had I'm not gonna raise it to the level of Tim Wise language or intellect, but I do want to read you my response and then take your much better one off the cuff, although I'm sure you've already reacted to that claim many times in many places. But I wrote, if your white kids feel bad about themselves after learning about the true history of our country or our current systemic racist institution, then that's on you as a parent. Let teachers teach your kids they can make it better for their peers and the next generation. Do you like that? What's good? What's bad? What do you say to those arguments? Well, you're making my kid feel bad about being white. Shame for being white. He didn't do anything wrong.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think your answer is excellent. And I think, look, here's this argument would be like saying, for example, if in the wake of World War II, if we had heard here in the United States that German schools were saying, we were thinking about teaching about that thing we just did, but we sort of, I don't think we're gonna because we don't want to make German kids feel bad. We all would have said, well, that's ridiculous. That's horrible. You've got to admit what you did. So if this were any other country that was, saying that its schools were not going to teach about the horrible things it had done, like Nazi Germany, we would immediately recognize the fallacy of that. But because it's our country, and let's be honest, we don't think we've done anything like that, like what the Nazis did. We don't think that enslavement and segregation and lynching and Jim Crow were even in the same universe as that, which says a lot about our downplaying of our own historical evils. But because we don't see it in the same universe, we think that it's okay to not tell the truth because it's not going to cause guilt. And I wrote about this recently in a piece, that if you really want to make sure that your white children don't feel guilty about the history of racism in America, then there's a really easy thing that you could do. And none of the right wingers ever want to do it, which is talk about the white folks who were instrumental in the abolition movement, who were involved in the civil rights struggle. There are not enough of these people, but there are a lot more than most folks know about, right? Most folks don't if you ask most people, like name a white person in history that stood up against racism, the best that most people can do is Lincoln, right? And that's like the only one. And if you really know, Lincoln's actual views were that had it been possible to maintain the Union without getting rid of enslavement, he said he would have done that. Had it been possible to send all black folks back to Africa, he said he would have done that. So he wasn't truly anti-racist. I'm not trying to take away from the greatness of some of his actions, but he was not what we would consider a true anti-racist. So if that's the best you've got, what that tells me is that the only white people we've learned about have been the enslavers and the industrialists who exploited workers and the white folks like George Wallace and the white, we learned about the founding fathers, a disproportionate number of whom were enslavers and virtually all of whom were at some level white supremacists. So if you don't want kids to feel guilty, talk about the folks. And I wrote a piece where I named a bunch of these folks. Talk about the folks who stood up. There were people who were standing up even during the colonial period. Herbert Aptheker did a great book called Anti-Racism in U.S. History, the First 200 Years. And almost no one's read it, but it's a great book because it starts in the colonial era and talks about white folks in particular who stood up even in the 1600s, in the 1700s, in the early 1800s, once the country was a country, but a new country that was, very firmly committed at that point to ongoing enslavement. There were always white folks who said no. And if you're a white kid and you learn about that, then that's going to mean what? That you don't have to feel bad. You don't have to affiliate or associate with the white folks who were enslavers. You could affiliate and associate with those that were abolitionists.
Right.
But no right-winger ever wants to do this. Why? Because they don't want children to know that there is this other, white children, to know that there is a path of solidarity with black and brown folks. That's why. It's the only reason. Because that's the easiest way to deal with guilt is you say, wait a minute, you don't have to, you feel bad about Thomas Jefferson raping Sally Hemings and being a slave owner? That's all right. Well, you don't have to identify with Thomas Jefferson. You could identify with, this person. Or, Andrew Jackson, yeah, he's a really awful guy, but, you could identify with Jeremiah Everts, who was one of his harshest critics, a white guy, a writer and an activist in his own, who stood up against Andrew Jackson. There, for every one of these awful people in history, there is a counterpoint that is available, and not just from black and brown folks, but also from white folks as well.
Such a great answer, such great insights, and I want to talk more about that. But I do want to also just jump around and ask you a few questions about your latest writing. And everybody should go read it, timjwise.medium.com, and follow Tim on Twitter and find out all the different ways you can access his work. And I want to go back to mid-August when you wrote this great piece, which is, outside of what you kind of generally talk about with culture and race and everything else, but it's titled "The Problem with Doing Your Own Research." It's such a great piece. It's so important. And I love this. It's as often it's kind of things I'm thinking about, but I'm not a great writer or necessarily able to articulate it. You did a great job with this. How does this matter? What is happening with these people? Because they show up at these Board of Education meetings and they have reams of paper, Tim. Notebooks and things that they've written down, that they've researched. What's the problem with doing your own research?
Well, look, I do research all the time. Research is great. The problem is that research is not the same as just looking shit up, as I say in the article, right? Yeah. Anybody can look stuff up. Anybody can, anyone with a Google machine, and that's pretty much everybody in America in the modern era. And certainly all these folks who are making all this noise, they all got the Google machine. They can all look things up. But the problem is that the Google machine will not show you things that are necessarily true. And in fact, just like YouTube, a lot of these algorithms, particularly social media algorithms, but even search engine algorithms, are sometimes juiced in a way that is going to show you more of what it is you're used to seeing. So if you're somebody who starts out, maybe you have open mind at the beginning. I don't think this is true for a lot of people, but maybe you do. But if you go down that rabbit hole of anti-vax conspiracism, if you go down the rabbit hole of QAnon, well, the platforms that you're on are going to keep pushing more of that. They're not going to push the fact checking to you. They're not going until you've gone down the rabbit hole so far that every time you do see a fact check, you think that it's fake news and you think that they're in on the conspiracy, right? So the problem is not with doing research. Everyone should, but research is something you have to learn how to do. And when I say that, there are research methods. When someone says to me, I do my own research, I say, well, what's your research method? Like what is your methodology for doing it? And they look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. What do you mean? I just look shit up. Well, I can get on there and I'll just look it up myself. Well, that's research. Refreshing your Facebook page is not research, right? Like listening to what, Aunt Maybelline says or Uncle Cooter or whatever, and I always use these. I shouldn't use these Southern examples. It's like self-hatred, I guess, being a Southerner. But
you should, because the people at my town, it's so crazy how they come. I'm pretty good at judging these people, but one after another walks up to the microphone. I was like, this guy, I just looked him up and down. And I'm not a good person for doing this, but I was like, well, this guy is not going to say some nonsense. And one of the first things he says is, there's no there's no consensus on vaccines. Okay. I'm like, I had him wrong. I thought he was going to be
Right. All right. And so I shouldn't like stereotype people as, but it's just that because I'm from the South, all my examples are the people I see are Aunt Maybelline and Uncle Cooter, and, but there are Uncle Cooters that, that sound like they're
Karen and Brad.
like they're from South Boston, or they sound like they're from Westchester County, or they sound like they're from wherever. Some of these, big anti-vax things have been out in Beverly Hills. I mean, so obviously it's not just Southerners, and it's not just working class folks. But the thing that's bizarre is when you ask people, like, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? How do you know that what you're seeing is how do you fact check? How do you, do you follow the footnotes? My kids, when they were in, I think, first grade, were told really clearly by their teachers, do not use Wikipedia for anything that you look up unless you are willing to follow the footnotes. And now, Wikipedia is fine if you want to get an idea about something, and then you want to follow the footnotes that are connected to the Wikipedia article is fine. Although, Wikipedia can be sort of janky.
Tim, I'll just use. Yeah, I agree. You read it with a very critical eye, and I'll just use. I'm big enough to have a Wikipedia profile. I don't want to brag, but I'm also big enough to have it hacked. And according to Wikipedia, I'm a prop comic and a pedophile, and both of those are untrue, sir.
Right. Well, no, my kids actually looked me up at one point, and it said somebody had gotten in there and at least for a couple of hours, just so happened to be the hours that my kids were looking it up. It said that I majored in killing white babies. So there's that.
Is that true?
No, they didn't offer that at Tulane. I mean, if they had, probably I might have taken it, but no, I just did
Jesus. Yeah. Crazy.
I did poli-sci, which is just code for killing white babies.
Right. Well, speaking of which, just along these lines of doing your own research, these two physicians in my community also came up and spoke. And I generally don't do my own research because I have access to a lot of physicians. I just text them. And, if you're really good friends with a physician and they have a good sense of humor, they will tell you when you complain of a rash here or there, as my doctor friends do, that I have Parkinson's, cancer, and Alzheimer's all together, clearly. And then maybe they'll get back to you with a real answer. But the point is, you're asking experts who have the degrees, that you need a degree to do research to break down science. But their complaint was, Tim, and I want to know what you think of this, was when I said, why don't you just ask the doctors? They said they're political. And I want to know what they meant by that, because they really don't. But what I can surmise is that they think somehow the doctors are getting rich off of COVID. I don't know what it means, though.
Some of them really do think that. This is and I mentioned this in the piece. Everybody, wants to say, well, everybody's paid off. So big pharma, is behind the vaccines and big medicine is behind pushing all this. And that's why you're not getting the truth. But these are the same people that apparently don't think the vitamin supplement producers, who they will swear by, or, that they have no financial incentive to push their shit. Like, you think that, a mega dose of vitamin D will do it? Well, the people pushing that at GNC would love for you to believe that. And they have a financial incentive too. Why is it that the alternative medicine people are supposedly pure and don't have an agenda, and the regular medicine folks do? The fact is they both might. I don't know. But that's why you learn to actually do research. And one of the things I said in the piece, look, it's not that every doctor is right. That's why we get a second opinion, right? So if you have a medical thing going on, and you might want to get a second opinion, especially if the first one is like, really serious invasive surgery. So you might want to get a second opinion. But when you get that second opinion, you do not get that from Kale Mama 420 on Reddit. You go to another doctor and get it from a doctor, right? And you might get 3 or 4, but you're always going to go to the people who went to medical school, who got a medical degree. If you want to get your car fixed, you're going to take it to a mechanic. If you want to have somebody, weed your garden, you're going to get someone who's a landscaper or whatever. You're going to go to someone who has actually studied the thing.
A pilot.
Right. Right. And so the idea that the doctors are political, okay, well, that's fine. But are you not going to go to a doctor then if you have another health issue, if you anything other than COVID? Are you just saying you're not going to go to doctors anymore? And the answer is, of course, no, they're not saying that. But it's fascinating because when, Phil Valentine, who's just died, right?
God rest his soul.
Here in Nashville. Right. Phil, famously, before he went into the hospital, made a comment on his show. He wasn't as bad as some of these guys in terms of being completely anti-vax. He was just this really irresponsible skeptic. And I say irresponsible because to me that's even worse, right? It's like you're not being, you don't have the certitude to say for sure. But when you say stuff like, well, we just keep an open mind, you're encouraging people to not use their brains. And so what he said, which I thought was very telling, he said, I've done some research enough to know that I'm probably not going to get sick and I'm probably not going to die. Well, clearly that's not the case. But he said that's what you should do. You should do your research. You should base it on your own medical history. You should look at your medical history and make a decision based on what you know about yourself. No, you go to your doctor and you ask your doctor. It's fascinating to me to say, do your own homework. The best homework you could do is call your primary care physician and ask them. And all these people that, listen to, I realize there are folks who don't have primary care physicians, and that's a whole nother debate. But the people that are listening to Phil Valentine, they have health care. The people that are listening to these yahoos, they have health care, they have a doctor, and they are purposely avoiding going to them. And I think the reason is because they know full well that there is, in fact, a consensus, as much as you can have any consensus about anything in this world when it comes to how to deal with COVID. There is a consensus about vaccines. There is a consensus about the dangerousness of the Delta variant. There is a consensus that if you don't get a vaccine, you're going to be at much greater risk. And they know that. And the problem is, if you are being told by people who you know are smarter than you, and this is what I say in the article, the reason, they know that these people know more than them, and they feel that it is a judgment against them and their identity that makes them feel stupid when someone who they know damn good and well is smarter than they are tells them that they're wrong. It's one thing if someone who they don't know is smarter because they're not a physician said, but if a physician says it, that is a threat to their identity, because you actually know that doctor, it's like Anthony Fauci. Oh, that's that guy that paid attention in school. That's that guy who actually did his. I hated that kid. Yeah. They know more than me, and they look down on us. These are the kind of people that didn't like Barack Obama, and not necessarily for racial reasons, although I think there was an undercurrent for most of these folks.
No, but I heard that from a lot of people that would say this. They'd call in. I met him online I met a guy online at the inauguration of Trump, and his whole point about Obama was, that he talked down to him. He's glad that his president now, meets him where he's at.
Right. And see, that's it. Like you don't want. So it used to be with George W. Bush, people would say, well, he's like a guy you'd want to have a beer with. Right. Well, not me. I wouldn't want to have a beer with George W. Bush. But I guess what they're really saying is he's just normal folks. Yeah, normal folks for a dude that was born wealthy as hell in Connecticut, not even in Tennessee, not even in Texas. He's a phony Texan. But that was what they would say. Well, I like him because he's just a normal guy. And Barack Obama's like a professor. And professors always made me feel stupid. And so really what this is, it's a seething inferiority complex. There are folks whose self-esteem is so incredibly low that expertise is viewed by them as a threat. If you feel out of control, if you feel like your life is, not what you wanted it to be, anyone who sort of tells you that you're wrong about something, and someone who's made something more of their life perhaps than you did, that is a threat to your very identity. And so I think we have to understand that the odds of people like this being persuaded by doctors, by experts, by scientists is sub-zero. It's not going to happen. The only kind of people that might convince them that they're wrong would be someone in their family. And even then, we've seen, there have been plenty of stories about people who've lost loved ones over this. So even that's no guarantee, but that's probably the only thing, because the reality is a lot of these folks are just too far gone. There was a story, I'm sure you saw today, about this QAnon dude who just died, and he, to the end, denied that it was COVID. And his friend, who's now, flacking for him after he's passed, is another QAnon person who's saying that they killed him in the hospital. They killed him in the hospital. He didn't have COVID. There is no COVID. They murdered him because they couldn't afford, they had to silence him. This is where these folks are. They are going to die, and their associates and their friends are going to say they were murdered by a nurse or a doctor because they were exposing the truth. These people can't be reasoned with. They just have to be defeated mercilessly.
I argue with some old folks outside this previous Board of Education meeting. It was fine. It was polite. But one of the things they said, and they were old, Tim, they were like in their 80s, I think. They said they don't know anybody who's died of COVID. And I was like, well, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't know a lot of people. Maybe, they're that old that a lot of people they don't are no longer with us. But I was surprised to hear a senior citizen say that. Nonetheless, they expanded their argument and they said, of course, as you're saying here, well, they say they died of COVID, but what they really died of was something else. And they called it COVID, which is the way of saying what you just said. They'll always come up with something to make themselves be right. And part of that is the owning the libs argument, right? It's just about not being wrong and winning. And that shouldn't have any place in any thoughtful discussion.
Right. No. And it essentially is this pathology that says whatever a liberal says, or whatever I think a liberal believes, I have to be against that. Or whatever a Democrat says, or whatever. I mean, this is why they're flip-flopping on Afghanistan now too, right? I mean, these are people who for years, all they've said during the Trump administration was we need to stop the forever wars. All these right-wingers who suddenly became anti-war, which was fascinating, right? Because these were the people who were usually the first to support bombing the hell out of Iraq, bombing Afghanistan, et cetera, after 9/11. So now, of course, Trump, comes along and he's making all these, statements about getting out of these wars. And now all of a sudden they're all, loving on Glenn Greenwald and all these folks and saying, we got to get in the forever wars. And now, Biden follows through, whether you think that was a good idea or not, without, any kind of real conditions, follows through with Trump's plan. And now they're all like, look what he's done. We need Trump back. This is it, right? This is if the Democrats do something, even if it's the exact same thing that the Republicans were doing, if someone who they perceive as liberal says something, they have to be against it, even if they were literally for it a week ago. And it's all rooted in this sort of tribal politic, which is rooted in a notion of the opposition being literally evil. And this has really, been something which is a phenomena that only has about a 30-year pedigree. Yeah, there have always been people who felt that way, but it was really only, I think, when the Rush Limbaughs of the world and a lot of the right-wing talk radio sort of silos became so popular and so prominent beginning in the 90s that you began to see this. And now with social media algorithms pushing, the same stuff to people that they've been reading before, it becomes almost impossible to break out of those silos, which is why, I've written about this many times and talked about it. We absolutely have to insist not only that we teach accurate, racial history and talk about race in school, but we also need to be doing media literacy work with our kids in schools, making sure that from a very early age, they actually do know how to research. They actually do know how to sift through not only political arguments, but even commercial arguments. Because, the worst thing, the stuff kids are being bombarded with even more than politics is like when they get on social media, it's like with my kids, they get on and, these influencers who they follow or whatever, who are hawking products that they don't know anything about. Like, it's like, oh, this skin cream is the greatest skin cream ever. You don't know what that, you probably don't even use that. But whoever makes the skin cream decided to sponsor your YouTube channel. Kids need to be able to sift through the commercial propaganda as well. But we don't teach young people how to do that. We don't teach, and sometimes kids can teach us, actually, older folks, because we're just as bad as anybody. But we need to be teaching that in our schools so that by the time those young people become adults, they do have the research ability so that when they say, I do my own research, they'll actually know what the hell they're talking about.
That reminds me, I do have to do a live read for Moinkbox, folks. If you love the greatest meat in the world, go to moinkbox.com/Tanda. I didn't have to do that, but it's like it. By the way, is to the one of the points you made. I forget which piece is like there's something that reasonable people can disagree on. What's the best steak? Who's the best major league pitcher? But reasonable people can't disagree on several other things. I'm just thinking of, I forget which piece you were.
The example I use, people will say, well, let's just agree to disagree. And no, Aunt Judy, no. When we agree to disagree, that is when we are having a discussion about who's the greatest Major League Baseball player of all time. And you say Bob Gibson and I say Sandy Koufax, and we both could be right because they were both really amazing. And so that's something we can agree to disagree. We can even agree to disagree about the strength of a particular study on, let's say, racial discrimination in the job market, right? I can look at a study. You can look at a study. We may see different things. You may critique the methodology. Fine. We can have a spirited discussion about that. What we cannot have a reasoned discussion about or agree to disagree is whether or not the United States was founded as a white supremacist society, because it actually was. It was, as I've said on your show before, the first law Congress passed after the Constitution was ratified was the Naturalization Act of 1790, which limited citizenship to white people. If that's the first thing that you do, like before anything, before you figured out taxes, before you made sure you had an army to withstand if the Brits came back and tried to take, the colonies back, before you did any of that, you're like, no, first things first. We got to make sure everybody knows that this new thing here is for white people. Like, if that's what you do, you're telling me that it is, in fact, a society of racial supremacy or white supremacy. That's not really debatable among reasonable people. Now, if you want to say, yes, Tim, and it was also a nation that, that put forward certain principles which can be used to take apart white supremacy, cool. We can have that discussion and we can have that debate, and that's fine. But we can't really debate the basic fact of history. And with COVID, you can't say, I mean, we can certainly have a debate, for instance, about the efficacy of one kind of mask versus another kind of mask. We can have a debate about the efficacy of, 6 feet social distancing. We can have a discussion about whether or not we ought to be getting on airplanes or not. There are lots of things that we could discuss and debate. We can even debate and discuss, the single shot vaccine versus the double shot vaccine.
Right.
We can debate the travel ban. We can debate, but what we can't debate is the idea that the vaccine is putting a microchip in you that is going to allow Bill Gates to track your location, or that it is changing your DNA, or that it is shedding off your body and causing women to have miscarriages. Like, that is not something that we can just agree to disagree. When you say that to me, I am on my Google machine looking up doctors near you who specialize in delusions, because you are that is what we're going to do. We're not going to agree to disagree. I'm going to get a very nice calming shade of yellow to paint the inside of your house, because I hear that that's a very good calming shade, and you clearly need. Like, there's no rational discussion you can have with that.
It's funny that you say that, because a woman did come up to me after that meeting the other night, and she had gone to the microphone and she had said, really whacked out conspiracy theories about, everything from, I think she even said Area 51. She also talked a little bit strangely, which made me more concerned about her mental health, really. And then she came up to me after, got right in front of me, and she very thoughtfully and gently and passionately told me how I needed to know the truth about CRT and what they're teaching in schools. And Tim, in that moment, I went into a compassionate mode, because I realized this person was actually, as you're saying, like, this person really was mentally ill. And I think that it's worth discussing more deeply about some folks, because some of them are, and when, and then we can talk about what that can lead to. But I simply said to her, no, it's not happening. And you should feel comfort knowing that what you are worried about is actually not something you need to be concerned about. It's not happening.
Right. And I think you make a really good point. And I want to be real clear.
And then I launched into a Tribe Called Quest, and that got really weird, because I don't know the words.
Right. Well, I think you make a really important point when it comes to the mental health piece. And I certainly don't want it to seem like I'm making fun of people in that condition, because I wrote a piece about the QAnon thing a couple months ago on Medium, where I talk about this is really serious mental disorder, and calling it that is not to mock it. It's not to shame it. There's nothing shameful about mental illness any more than any other kind of illness. But the problem is, if we're not willing to name it, if we're not willing in our own families and people that we know that are friends, if we're not willing to say that is unbalanced thinking. That is delusional thinking. That I don't know the exact disorder, because I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's like, if I see someone bleeding and vomiting on the street, I don't know what they have, but I know they got something, and they need to see a doctor.
Well, I would argue that there is a kind of, and I'm sure you would, probably have much to say about this. There is a kind of mental illness. I'm not qualified enough to name it, but in following a cult, whether it be Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, or name your favorite inspirational person that makes you think a certain thing, and then you that there is a kind of a cult following mental illness. I mean, the people who followed David Koresh are those people that you would want, running an organization or a school, or no? I mean, they're not criminals necessarily, but they've certainly fallen into this crazy way of thinking, and that is a form of mental illness. I just don't know how to talk about it. It just is clearly affecting our country and every country.
Right. And I think that when we have friends and family and people that we know who are engaging in that kind of thinking, we have an obligation as caring, compassionate people to try to name what it is we're seeing. And the thing that concerns me is right now we want to tiptoe around it, or we want to say, well, no, they just got sucked down the rabbit hole of right-wing conspiracy thinking, and it's just, they're just been radicalized, politicized. Yeah, that's true. But if you are now gone beyond that to a level of mental and emotional disturbance, we really have to start talking about getting people help.
Well, yeah, and you write about this, if you don't mind me just reading from your own piece in a piece titled "The Problem with Doing Your Own Research," which we talked about. You write, yes, the relative democratization of communication compared to the days when gatekeepers more tightly limited the voices to which we might be exposed is a welcome step in the direction of a more open society. But at the same time, with more information also comes more noise. And with the ability to spread noise like never in human history, cacophony becomes the default position. And that last two sentences is what a lot of people have been saying, but I really like the way that you say it right there, because it is becoming the default position. The moon is made of cheese is becoming a thing that a lot of your neighbors and friends believe.
Right. And it used to be, and that's why, that's why I started out the piece by saying the internet's a wonderful thing and also the absolute worst thing ever, because look, I remember the days in the 90s when it was sort of de rigueur on the left for people who are progressive to talk about, the concentration of big media, and there were only a handful of companies, and one of them was GE, and they're a defense contractor, and what we need is to break up big media. And yeah, there were definitely issues with the control of, with only a handful of networks and a handful of people owning newspapers and a handful of book publishers that had the influence. So it's definitely good to have a democratization that the internet has provided, but what we have replaced those gatekeepers with, the one function that gatekeepers did serve was that it tended to filter out stuff that just did not have any evidentiary basis. Now, it also filtered out inconvenient truths, right? It filtered out inconvenient truths about the Vietnam War. It filtered out inconvenient truths about the history of racism. So that clearly was a problem. But it also did a pretty good job, like the John Birch people in the 50s. That was stuff you weren't going to hear, in mainstream media. If you were a John Bircher and you sent a letter to the editor of your local paper, the odds were they were not going to run that. They're going to be like, that's crazy. So people in those days would communicate these conspiracy things, through mailing list, and it was very hush hush. And you would go to you'd go to the Lions Club or the Elks Club and meet with people or whatever you did. It was very on the down low in terms of not wanting to be known as someone who was a conspiracist. It was viewed even among the right. Bill Buckley famously, did this thing where he went off on the Birchers. Now, I think it was somewhat disingenuous because he actually was also in favor of a lot of the same kind of thinking as some of the Birchers on certain issues. Right. Yeah. But he was very worried that they were going to take over the conservative movement, which they have clearly in the present. But that's the thing, is it used to be, even with the racist stuff, like when I was doing the work against David Duke that I did, as most of your listeners know, when I started doing anti-racism work, that was what I was doing in Louisiana. And back in those days, like if you wanted to be exposed to David Duke's thinking, you had to get on the mailing list of the National Association for the Advancement of White People, which was the group he founded after he left the Klan. You had to get on the mailing list of these far-right racist organizations, and the stuff would come to you in like a plain brown wrapper like porn, right? Like, I mean, that was the way that people were getting this. You didn't have it spreading in the way that it spreads now. And on the one hand, it's great that we have access to information. It is fantastic that I can go online, and if I know how to research, I can find really important information from the CDC, from the National Institutes of Health, from the Smithsonian, from whatever subject I'm looking up. I can find, I've got subscriptions to 3 different academic journal article websites where I'll go in and read like all of the new studies that get done about racial discrimination in housing or employment or the justice system, right? And I do that on purpose because I know like this is vetted research. This is research being done by scholars who know more about this shit than I do. And I know a lot, but they know more. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to read what they're finding out. Yeah, but that's great. That was a lot harder when you had to do the Dewey Decimal System and had to go into the library, but the problem is, for every person who has the subscription to the academic journal article, there's somebody who's going on, 4chan or Reddit and listening to, Patriot Dad 1411 or whatever.
Well, you did that. You actually did the ratio wrong. For every person subscribing to an academic journal, there's thousands of people listening to Patriot Dad. And just to add one small bit to your point, I mean, seriously, I mean, if you did want to you want to join the Klan and get some extremists, or porn wrapped in some discreet package, I mean, you still had to write a letter or type it out and bring it to the post office and drop it off and wait a few days. Now you just need to clickety-clack, boom, and it spreads to Vienna within a matter of seconds. I mean, I had a tweet go viral, got 800 retweets, Tim. I don't know what I'm talking about. But the point is, like, whatever anybody's saying, if it works, everybody can buy into it. And it's just the way that you articulate it, and that piece is so good. I know I got to let you go, but I do want to ask you one more question about one more piece, which I confess I actually haven't read. But I'm really excited to read it, and everybody should be subscribing to Tim at timjwise.medium.com. The link is in the show notes, and obviously following him on Twitter and everything. But this piece is it's titled, "Who Are You Calling Lazy? Those who do the least work always get the most credit." I mean, there's no way to encapsulate this piece because you have so many reference points and things to read here, but maybe just give me a couple minutes on it if you want.
Well, so that piece was one. So Medium actually has just had a writing contest, and they had 4 prompts that they gave writers. And one of them was on death, one was on space, one was on reentry, and one was on work. And that was the one that I entered under the prompt of work. And essentially,
that's great.
All of these prompts were supposed to be written when you wrote about them for the contest. You're supposed to do sort of first person narrative. So it had to be some level of storytelling. And so the story that I told for the work prompt was a story about going with my wife. At the time, we were not married yet. We had been dating maybe a year. And our first trip that we took together to New Orleans after I had moved back to Nashville from there, we went down there, I think, for Jazz Fest or whatever. And during the 5 or 6 days that we were in the New Orleans area, we decided to go down to this very infamous plantation called the Nottoway Plantation, which is literally in a place called White Castle, Louisiana, which is on River Road, basically. Yeah, it was the biggest sugar plantation in the state, one of the biggest perhaps in North America. And the guy that owned it my wife is sort of an architecture geek. And so she was interested in it on that level. I was interested just in seeing the whitewashing of history. And I'd always wanted to take one of these tours, but I'd always been too reluctant. And I'm like, let's just do it. And, my wife had not gone to a concentration camp since she toured Dachau as a high school student. So I figured, well, shit, we'll go to a plantation. She can do that one. So we go to Nottoway, which was a concentration camp, whether we call them that or not. And there is a room, which is actually pictured I have the picture of this room is in this article on Medium. That was a ballroom in the plantation that John Hampton Randolph had built. He built this house. It was completed actually right before the Civil War. And this one particular room, which is, white everywhere, white walls, white ceiling, mostly white floor, white marble, fireplaces. It was like this famous room, and they would have balls there. They would have dances there. He made it all white, so supposedly to highlight the beauty of his daughters, which I think is sort of funny, as I mentioned in the piece, because white people against white background, really, we don't look very good, to be perfectly honest.
Speak for yourself, sir.
I couldn't, it's like you can't see white people against white walls. I was in a room filled with white people. I couldn't see anyone.
I don't know. I think me with a tan and a white T-shirt is as good as it gets, but go ahead.
Yeah, but they didn't. Yeah, but he didn't let his daughters tan. That's just it. These were like alabaster translucent daughters. I'm quite confident. And I say that as the father of a redhead who is also very, very light.
Yes.
But in any event, the piece starts out talking about that because when we took the tour, one of the docents on the tour who was showing us around, they said, they pointed to this box. It was I think it was like a box over in the corner, and it had these bells. It was like a bell system that Randolph had rigged in the house to essentially, I think it had like 12.5 or 24 different ringtones. And each of these bells would signal to one of the enslaved people who worked in the house where they were needed and what the need was. Wow. So like if little Algernon, who was one of the sons of John Hampton Randolph, needed to have his chamber pot changed, he would tug on this rope and it would signal to the enslaved person, oh, little Algernon needs his chamber pot thrown out. And then if Esther or whatever the girl's name, I can't remember her name, needed her corset tightened, there's a different bell for that. And the point I was making was, how effing lazy do you have to be to basically have 15 or 20 different tones. Like, you clearly at that point don't want to do anything for yourself. And the point that I was making was, we have this stereotype about who's lazy, right? And who are the builders and who are the makers and who are the takers. But the fact is, the wealthy have always done the least work. In fact, the wealthy never wanted to work hard. It was always those at the bottom, especially of color, but those at the bottom generally who've done the hardest work, got the least credit. And it was rich people who sat around drinking mint juleps on the back of their plantation home talking about the lazy blacks.
Well,
right?
They did take a lot of risks with their money.
Well, yeah, right, of course, except that John Hampton Randolph inherited all his money, and his father was a judge, and he moved to Louisiana with that money, bought 176 people, and he never worked a day in his life. But the docents were talking about, how John Hampton Randolph had worked hard to keep the place up. No, John Hampton Randolph didn't do anything. John Hampton Randolph went on carriage rides to look at his property. He didn't actually work. And I finished the story basically by segueing into, these conversations I would have in New Orleans all the time when I was a community organizer, and I would tell people what I did, working in public housing. And if somebody asks you what you do and you tell them that, inevitably the response would be, well, you know what we need to do for those people. And that would be the nice way to put it. Like, sometimes it wouldn't even be that nice. It was, what we need to do for those people is we need to send some CEOs into the projects to teach those folks how to manage money.
Right.
And as I say in the piece, the last time that happened, I said something, it was a slightly more caustic version of, surely you jest, my good man. It was a little more caustic than I got thrown out of the bar. But basically, the point is, like, these are people who think the problem is poor people don't know how to manage money. No, the women that I was working with in those public housing communities were surviving on like $385 a month in SNAP and what was then food stamps and ADC benefits, in addition to their low wage job. They had some low wage job that didn't pay enough, so they were still able to qualify for various social programs. They were making it work on that. Meanwhile, rich people are blowing money, left and right. So
just to add one tiny anecdote, all the poor people in my family that I know kept things so that they never had to buy that thing again.
Right.
That's right. A very responsible way to manage things if it's the only choice you have.
Right. And so I say in the piece, basically, bringing it full circle after the thing about Nottoway, saying, look, we really need to have people on the bottom teaching people at the top how to get by with less. That would actually make quite a bit more sense. And then I noted sort of humorously at the end of the piece that I'd gone to the Nottoway website as I was constructing the essay, and I had a tab for the history of Nottoway. So I clicked on it, and it was, according to the website, still under construction. Check back later. So I made the point at the end that I'm sure they will eventually build out that website once they find a black person to do it for them.
Tim Wise, everybody. Always great, my friend. So good. Thank you so much for talking to me.
You bet, man. Thank you.
Yeah, Tim Wise, always awesome. Go read all of his articles, all of them. They're so good. Get his book, support him on Patreon. He's going to start promoting that again and getting out and doing more videos and audios like I mentioned. But timjwise.medium.com. Go subscribe, and then you'll get an alert every time he puts out an article, which is at least every week and sometimes more, a few a week. So go subscribe at Tim Jacob Wise on Twitter. As always, please let him know that you heard him here. I haven't asked folks to write a review for this podcast in a while, and there hasn't been a review posted on iTunes in a couple weeks. So who's up? Who's next? Go write a review and give 5 stars to this podcast on iTunes. That matters. More people find out about the podcast. It's a great way to support it, as well as a subscription. You can always sign up for a subscription. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. Also, the new website is up. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to start pushing that. Thank you to DJ Monzak, longtime listener, Zach Lewis, for introducing me to DJ. You guys are the best. DJ made me an awesome website. It is up. Standupwithpete.com. Let me know what you like, how it works, and then we'll change it. We'll update it. Standupwithpete.com. Go check it out right now. And here now is my conversation with infectious disease expert. She is a scholar. She is great on Twitter. I love Meghan May on Twitter. And I always love talking to her, professor of microbiology and infectious disease. Lots to talk about with her today. Make sure you mention her, that you heard her here on the show as well. I always love talking to her. We have so much fun talking about the scariest shit in the world. And today's conversation is no exception. Dr. Meghan May, let's go.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Oh, not bad, thanks. This is our first day of school in our district today. So that was exciting.
Let me start by asking you then, you're the expert. Did you think your kid's first day of school would be the way it is in terms of COVID protocols and the what's the scientific word to talk about where the virus is at?
Well, it depends when you would have asked me the question.
Fair enough. Oh, such a scientific answer.
I can never just say yes or 5. It has to be, this big, long, nuanced thing. But
5.
Just 5. That's
all right.
it.
Well, hold on a second. Do you like to eat potato chips?
No, I don't. Oh.
Shit. Well, what's something that you love? Dude, I thought you were just going to say, okay.
I know. It's a weird
ice cream.
Thing. Oh, well, now it depends. Are we talking full fat, no fat, frozen yogurt, sugar-free, reduced fat?
I'm not a sociopath. We're talking full-on, full-fat, real-ass, sugar-ass ice cream.
Good. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Now, does it have any nonsense fruit in it, like this rum raisin nonsense? That's not it. Stop putting fruit in my dessert, unless it's a fruit tart, because that's delicious. Anyways.
Well, this is why, now just more proof about how thoughtful you are. There really isn't a yes/no answer, because you are a critical thinker, and you're not just going to take some dessert. You're not just gonna accept it. You want to know what's in there, and who could blame you? Which is why we love you.
I have questions, unless it's peppermint stick, in which case, always yes. Anyway,
so if I guess when maybe in the beginning of the year, or around when millions of people were being vaccinated every day and things were looking good on vaccination rates, did you think that school would be the way it is, that we'd have this new dangerous variant and masks, or was it at least a possibility?
So last maybe April, March, I was starting to feel somewhat hopeful, because it looked like, okay, the 12 to 16-year-olds are probably going to get an authorization fairly soon. Then there'll be summer to kind of let things dissipate. And hopefully at that point, it was still looking like everybody who could get a vaccine was like scrambling and, hitting refresh at 3:00 in the morning on the Walgreens site, like trying to get an appointment.
Right.
That being said,
that was me.
Yeah, that was me too. But the thing is, like, I was always a little bit skeptical that we were going to be able to keep that pace up. The thing is, I'm the person that teaches the medical students how to do vaccine outreach and vaccine communications, and like, where do these different myths and stories come from, and how do you actually try to meet people where they are? So that's always my mindset when it comes to vaccines. Like, I've met enough of these trolls to have dealt with them. And so the pace of vaccine demand that we were seeing in March and April, I was thinking, like, we're going to hit a wall sometime real soon, because at that point, when you were looking at all these people who went out the second they could and got a vaccine, you were talking about people who were, at first you're talking about people who are over 70. They're very high risk if they get infected, and people who are, between 55 and 70. These are people who still in their lifetime kind of saw the consequences of vaccine preventable diseases. So
great point.
Their compliance.
Your Mitch McConnells.
Yeah, your Mitch McConnells, if you will. The one time when I was like, good for Mitch McConnell. Bringing out his polio stories and saying, people need to get vaccinated. No, I was like, that's like I also tweeted praise of Lindsey Graham when he got COVID.
How dare you? You've crossed the line.
It was a one-off. Like, we all have that story from college. Like, this was mine. Okay. No, I wasn't in college. It was like a month ago. But the point being, when he had breakthrough COVID, he announced that he had it. And then at the last couple of lines of his tweet were, I'm grateful because even though I got sick, I'm far less sick than I would be if I hadn't been vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. So I'm saying, it's not often, but credit where it's due to be gracious.
No, I mean, I've been saying it. I've been saying it's so easy to call people dumb. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are dumb. I'm dumb about a lot of stuff. Ask me about music. But I think the more obvious thing is that people are misinformed.
Yes.
I mean, so when Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are saying take it good, when these radio people and TV people, right wingers and conspiracy theorists are saying don't take it, people are listening to them, and I think that matters. But that's more.
I agree completely. It's really frustrating because you see all of these different talking points, and so I had done this info session for my students. I ended up throwing it on YouTube because, I figured some of them asked.
Yeah, I shared it. It's awesome. I watched
saw
a lot
that.
of it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really good. Everybody can watch it. Just go through my timeline or go through Meghan's, obviously, and follow her if you're not already. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. But basically the way that I kind of structured it was to say, all right, here are the most common misconceptions that I hear about this vaccine. So let's talk about them. Not only from the standpoint of where did they come from, but also how can you actually engage with people productively, which is kind of sorry, I'm all over the place, but kind of the gist of your school board meeting speech. The answer is not to ignore each other and scream. The answer is okay, how do we actually engage and have a productive conversation about this?
Yeah, but you tweet about this a lot, and so I do want to ask you, and you're probably not the right person to ask, because the person I want to ask is the people who are saying it, but you may have I'm sure you have a more thoughtful answer than I do, because I really am stuck, and I will reach out to some of these people who are yelling at me. I mean, they were jeering me. I'm more nervous performing, talking to a no microphone at the school board than I was at the biggest theaters in the country that I've performed at over my career as a stand-up comic. But I understand why people don't do it, put it this way. But anyway, they're yelling at me, Meghan, yelling at me. And one of the things
I feel like it's different now. I've talked at, because I just went through this in our district because they originally said we're not doing a mask mandate. And a bunch of people who work at the hospital and I were like, oh, hell no, that's not going to happen. But it took 3 school board meetings of a bunch of us coordinating our efforts. Say, all right, you talk about this, you bring up this, you bring up that. And, for what to me was so obvious that it needed to happen. But the other side of it was you had this small group of people who constantly would go, and still do to this day, go to school board meetings, and they're coordinated too. And they scream about masks. They scream about critical race theory, which it's funny because I had the same experience that you were referencing, which was that these people are screaming about critical race theory. It's not even being taught. There's
right. But let me go back. Let me go back to my question about medicine for you, which is, so my thing, and you tweet about this a lot, about science and trusting the experts, and that's why I talk to you in press record, because you're an expert. You're a doctor. You teach this stuff at the university level. You know how research is done. You know the history of it all. You know all of the science around it, which is why that's your job. I'm not asking you to change my brake pads for a specific reason, although if you can.
I cannot, and I guarantee I would do it worse than you would. In fact, I actively recommend you do not ever ask me to fix or mend anything that could result in later
I don't know. You're pretty smart. You and a YouTube channel, I think, could probably figure it out as good as anybody. But here's my question, Meghan. I'm sitting there doing my little rant, folks that listen to me have heard it a lot of times about trusting experts. I've always said that critically thinking is important, but you have to trust experts. Who are the experts? And so what I wanted to do was when it came my turn to speak about the COVID protocol issues, I wanted to do what I always do. And it was kind of a trick, but I only thought of it in the moment because there was 2 physicians there, one a pediatrician, one a critical care ER surgeon. And they both were great. And so I said, you know what? We just heard a lot of information that's wrong. And I'm not casting any aspersions on people, but it's wrong according to the experts. And I was hoping I could give my time back to one of the 2 or both doctors. And they said, you can't do that.
So we wanted to try that too. We wanted to have a bunch of people that, were saying like, I need there to be a mask mandate. I don't want to talk because these people scream at me and they make like these snide remarks in the back of the room and they know which car I drive. They know where I live, all this kind of stuff. But you guys should have more time to talk because you have more relevant things to say. So we actually looked into it. Like, can you do like they do in Congress? Like I'm ceding my time to, whoever. And the same response. I was like, no, you can't do that, which is like,
Well, so one of the things that got yelled, and I want every listener's response to this, and I'm sure there are different responses, but I said, you got to listen to these doctors. And somebody yelled, they're political. It's politics. And other people have said the doctors are just plain politics. And Meghan, the only thing I can think of, again, I do want to know the answer to this, what people think is that somehow folks think that physicians and the healthcare industry at large are getting rich off of COVID. And so therefore they are saying things that aren't, I don't know, they're twisting the truth. I really don't know. But what do you hear when a critic of science and physicians, and especially the scientific consensus around things, says they're all political? You're political. What do they mean?
I have no idea. I think it's like, it stopped meaning anything quite some time ago. Like when Trump would just scream fake news at anything he didn't like. And it was sort of like you've ceased to even try to put meaning to that. Like you can't just say that upsets my worldview, so I'm going to scream that it's not real. But that's my thought. And and I'm sure you know this, I'm sure your listeners know this, but if you dig into any of these accusations for more than half a second, they just fall apart under the tiniest little squint. For example, my favorite is the idea that, I'm not taking the COVID vaccine because it's just big pharma trying to get rich. And part of me is sort of like, okay, let's do the thought exercise here. Let's pretend for a moment that I am not vaccinated. I am, but let's pretend I'm not. Is Pfizer going to make more money from selling 2 doses of a vaccine for me, or if I am in the ICU for 6 goddamn weeks? What is going to make them more money? You know what I mean?
Well,
it makes no sense.
But isn't and then you talk about the hospitals have been losing money because if you want to know what the racket is, if you want to know, it's not a racket. Well, I guess it's a racket. If you want to know how hospitals make most of their money, my understanding it's elective surgeries.
Yes. And they can't do them right now.
Most of their money.
And they have to because that's another thing. There are 2 huge aspects of COVID that I cannot for the life of me understand why more people are not screaming about. Because I actually think they would be kind of persuasive to people, not the tinfoil hat people, because it's not ever going to happen. But somebody who's, let's say, the vaccine hesitant among us, like 2 things that I think actually could be persuasive is if you point out to people, first of all, if you get this and you wind up in the hospital, and by the way, you're at much higher risk now than you were last August because this new variant is far more transmissible, and by now 3 different studies seems to be more virulent. So you're in greater danger now than you were last August. If you get this, you wind up in the hospital, you are going to have hundreds of thousands of dollars of bills waiting for you when you get out, if you get out. And it's just sort of like, how is that not negligible? Like, can you afford to risk not being vaccinated? Like, literally from a financial standpoint, can you afford that? So that's one thing. And I mean, I hate to put it that way because it sounds callous, but I'm frankly running out of ideas for how to convince people this is a good idea. The other that doesn't get nearly enough conversation is the idea of long COVID. Because I mean, I may have even said this same line to you at some point, but we have historically been talking about COVID as though it has just these binary outcomes, right? Like you live or you die. But there's this, enormous number of people who now have permanent, for all we know, lifelong disability that may be impairing their ability to do the job they once had. It may be impairing their ability to work at all. It may be having, just even if they can still work, they may be having terrible quality of life issues. So why would you risk that? I don't get it.
Right. Well, because they're so afraid of what the vaccine, I guess the best argument for them now would be, will do long term. We don't know the long term implications. Yeah, none of my friends
but part of me
are
like,
dying.
But I can tell you all about the long term implications of COVID. Would you like to hear about those? Because they're pretty bad. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no, that's the argument. But I guess a lot of people
makes me nuts because it's just like this is. I guess it's the definition of the expression like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And I'm thinking like, no, that is not, that does not apply here. The devil you know is like really bad.
Right. No, all good points. So let me ask you a couple other big questions. I almost want you to just interview yourself in terms of what you think the top things that this audience of ours needs to hear. But
I talk to myself all the time, so we have delightful conversations.
You guys are silly with each other, though. Sometimes I find you talk to yourself inappropriately and say mean and filthy things, and I disapprove, and I think you can do better. No, it's the new variant. Another one. South Africa, maybe. What am I reading? What am I hearing? Is it worse than Delta? Vaccine doesn't affect it. What are you hearing? What are you reading? What are you seeing? Is this inevitable?
Yes. That's so it's the new the new variant it's termed South African variant. It is more transmissible than Delta. We're still in the midst as this is all a little bit still kind of coming through the pipeline. So in terms of, what's has been verified and what hasn't been, in terms of transmission dynamics, everyone is quite in agreement. This is more transmissible than Delta, which is far more transmissible than Alpha, which was slightly more transmissible than OG COVID, if you will. But what we don't know is if it has the same pattern of making people sicker that Delta does. This is going to continue happening. And this is
the mutations,
yes,
the variants.
Absolutely. And so if you think about it, like just think back to like straight up Darwinism, right? So the idea of evolution is actually fairly straightforward. The viruses are no different than any of us, and because they tend to replicate in a way that's kind of sloppy and error prone, they evolve far faster than we do. And the thing is, you could kind of see how, if you think about it from the virus's standpoint, I like to emphasize with my research subjects, so I get in their head and whatnot. But if you think about it from the virus's standpoint, who's going to outcompete everybody else? Somebody who can transmit more efficiently, right? And so you're always going to be pressuring that virus. So long as you have susceptible people to replicate in, that virus is always going to be pushed to greater and greater and greater transmission. Not necessarily greater and greater virulence, but always greater and greater transmission.
Viruses are like capitalism, it would seem.
They are a lot like capitalism, in fact. So just when, we thought that Delta was like the Usain Bolt of COVID strains, then South African one is like Sha'Carri Richardson showing up. Like there's always going to be a faster one coming.
Right. Well, I don't know that she's definitely faster than Usain Bolt.
I know. I realized it was I shouldn't have done a mixed gender comparison.
She's the fastest woman alive. You're forcing me to defend male sprinters.
I didn't know that there was. I would have prepared better for an appropriate same gender metaphor, but we never know
I'll
where
let you
these
go
things
in a
are going to
minute
go.
But you got it. What else? That's the variant question that we're hearing. What else is something that you think we need to know right now that's really important to communicate, whether it be about the vaccine, about the variants, or about what we can do individually to try to move folks in the right direction in their thinking? And where are you on ivermectin, by the way?
I was going to say, I have two things to say, and one of them is about ivermectin. So we had
Have you ever? Let me just say this first before you say anything about ivermectin. Have you ever heard of a pharmaceutical drug company, much less, as we talked about earlier, ice cream or chip company, saying don't take this drug, or don't eat this, don't drink this? Like for a pharmaceutical drug, they're always going to warn about, only in America do we have advertisements for drugs, but they're always going to warn, ask your doctor if but for Merck, which makes ivermectin, to say, don't take this to treat COVID. I feel like we've never heard that kind of a thing from a drug maker. Don't take our drug.
Exactly. And they're not even doing it from a liability standpoint, because it's, the ones people are taking are clearly veterinary formulations that all say on them, not for human consumption. So they're literally doing it so people won't die. No, that is a new one. In fact, it's just remarkable. But so put a pin in ivermectin. The thing that we were talking about this afternoon, just about when people have, make the point that, well, vaccinated people can still shed the Delta variant.
Oh, yep.
Why bother getting vaccinated? Because you're not actually protecting anyone. And I think it's a really simplistic understanding of a fact that is not untrue, but requires a lot of context. And, the first bit being that, yes, vaccinated people can become infected with Delta and they can shed it and transmit it, but their period during which they're shedding virus is much, much, much shorter than an unvaccinated person. So while that might be true at any given moment in time, it's not true over an extended period. So in other words, if parallel universe Meghan is not vaccinated, and we both got infected with the Delta variant on the same day, this universe Meghan might shed for 18 hours, 24 hours. Parallel universe Meghan is going to shed far, far, far longer than that, and therefore has a potential to infect many, many, many more people. So it's not.
She also loves fruit and ice cream. And
she loves chips and sugar-free ice cream. Those are her favorites. Especially,
she's a sociopath.
She is a hot mess. I think she might eat the chips. Eat the ice cream with the chips. Like Pringles.
Oh my God, she's an absolute
nightmare.
This parallel universe Meghan is a monster. But
anyway,
the point is still true.
The point is still true.
the shedding of the virus point.
The shedding of the virus point. So that's one kind of reason why, yes, that is true. You can shed virus, but you are far less dangerous on the balance. And then the other point, of course, is, in your instance, you think about this from a parent perspective, and I do constantly as well. Your girls are both vaccinated, right?
How dare you?
I know.
It's none of
HIPAA violate. Hey,
yes, the day they could be.
Yeah, exactly. That's like my oldest son was like the day he turned 12. He's like, "Can you get my vaccine for my birthday?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." that's very that really tracks for one of my kids.
That's only the child of a scientist such as yourself would ask for such a birthday present.
Exactly, but he did, and it worked out, so that's fine. But my younger son is not vaccinated, and what that, of course, has to do with people saying, "Well, why bother even getting this?" Is, well, for starters, you lot are overwhelming hospitals. So people who need their tumors resected or need their hips replaced, which again is not going to save their life potentially, but it's certainly going to improve their quality of life. You are denying hospital beds to those people, and never mind somebody who has a heart attack or if,
motorcycle accident,
whatever it is.
Runs and jumps off a moving speedboat going 35 miles an hour because he wanted to impress a teenage girl and didn't know that if you land in the water and it's not moving, your head will almost come off. He didn't know that, but he might need the emergency room. That kid, that wasn't me. He wasn't me.
Totally was definitely
nothing
not
to do with me. I'm not a dummy.
Definitely not if you choked on chips because you were eating them with ice cream. And yeah, definitely also not me.
That person doesn't desuve to live anyway.
That is true. I will give you that.
No matter what.
But
they're clogging up.
You're clogging up hospitals, and finally, you can make your own friggin' choice. You have no right to put my kid in danger. You don't, because he can't be vaccinated yet. And
Amen.
Kids are actually in danger from Delta now. It's far worse than they were before. And
these screams of liberty and freedom for me and for my children, the same exact argument can be made from the vaccinated and with much more credibility.
I was just going to say, but it actually would carry weight in that instance.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that's the thing.
Yeah, because that answers the question. I mean, some guy tweeted me, and I asked you about this, that the vaccinated and unvaccinated can all transmit COVID. Therefore, whether or not they're vaccinated is irrelevant in the terms of how they affect me. I'm tired of the vaccinated peons acting like they can't carry high viral loads and transmit it when they know they can. That is a very, very shitty argument, but yet I still sent it to you to handle it, and you sent me these points that you made, the scientific points about it as well as the ethical points.
Well, and you forgot my first point, which was way to flip the argument to make you into the victim instead of the douchebag in this scenario, but okay.
Well, yes, and that's what's happening constantly. It's also what's happening on all the racial shit too,
Yes.
my white kid doesn't like himself anymore because of history. Well, then you're a bad parent.
You're not good at giving context. It's
wild.
It's a whole thing. But I also just realized before ivermectin, I totally tangented it and forgot to answer your very first question, which was, did I think the school year would be like this? Back in the spring, I was hoping it would be kind of like it is now, at least in our district, where everyone's back in school, but they're masked, which again was far more of a fight than it really should have been. But at least in our district,
it's far from over.
Yeah.
So in my district, they're physically threatening people. And what do you say? What do you say about that? The arguments they're making is that the odds of your kid getting sick, much less getting really sick, much less dying, are so low, and they far outweigh the evidence around whether or not these masks work. I really don't. Everybody seems to be cherry picking studies, and then you break down, well, what mask are we talking about? And then you break down, well, is there any ventilation? And it seems like it's a really hard study to prove masks in schools, whether or not they work. But then you look at other countries and other states that have opened up, and those that have masks and those that don't. And then finally, what we don't have is the research about Delta enough.
Yes.
And, when it comes to the mask argument. So that's where I kind of stand on it. Better safe than sorry.
I talked at where our school board actually took the vote to adopt the mandate was, I said, we don't have to pretend and we don't have to speculate. We can look at Florida, and what we can see is there are 2 counties that are imposing mask mandates anyway, one of which is Alachua County, where I used to live, and my oldest son was born there. So I was like, oh, good for you, Gators. But the point being that, they had, 1 or 2% of their student body that was either tested positive or was being impacted by quarantine. And if you looked at Broward, which I think was the other county that did it, he had kind of similar numbers. And then if you looked at, I think Hillsborough County was the worst, where Tampa is, it was like 40% within the first week of school was either positive, sick, or in quarantine. And it was just sort of like, we don't need to imagine that maybe these make a difference. They clearly do.
So in the same state, in different districts,
Right.
those with masks did far better than those without.
Exactly. And so it was just maddening. And, I don't know, it's a whole thing.
You would think the sunlight in Florida would have killed the virus.
Yeah, because the UV bulbs, if you stick them in, anyway.
In your skin. We can't do it.
It goes well, but...
All right, well, I'll let you go, to be continued. There's a lot more to talk about with you, and I really appreciate your time as always, Meghan. So let me know what's next and when we need to talk and what we need to talk about. You're in charge.
Sounds good. Oh, continuation for ivermectin in the meantime.
Oh, yeah.
As a
Make
teaser.
that last point.
Oh,
sorry. Yes.
No,
what did you want to add about that?
That's okay. We can
That's
talk
all right.
another time.
I got time. I just don't.
Oh, okay. So basically, the long and short of this is there was one super sketchy study that came out from this guy in Egypt. If you look at the original study, it's clear the data are clearly fake. He didn't even fake them convincingly. Like, the study allegedly took place over, a series of dates, and then the patients who died because they didn't get ivermectin, died outside of those date ranges. It was not even remotely close to being well done. And from that, you had a series of people that, wrote a bunch of commentaries about why, hypothetically, what if this did work? There really is not any good evidence that it does. And frankly, ivermectin is, as a drug, it's got a long, long list of side effects. Even if you're using the human version, it's still not an easy drug to take. But certainly if you're using the veterinary version,
well, yeah, there's different versions, and people get confused about that. And then they start talking about, you're covering up the research. Why wouldn't you let the research be done? And it's such a bizarre thing, too, because that just doesn't really happen very often at all in the history of research. Because the bottom line is, if you wanted to believe in a conspiracy, then the conspiracy would be if I found a solution to any of these things,
exactly,
I would be promoting the hell out of it. If it actually worked, things generally become billion-dollar drugs when they work. Nobody's trying to hide that stuff. And why would they?
Exactly.
I guess it's because
healthcare workers that are coming up on, 20-ish months of just constant, fried burnout. There's so many healthcare workers with PTSD.
Yep.
If we could give a magic pill that would cure it, are you out of your mind if you think people wouldn't? It's nonsense.
Every doctor in the country would be, I just read about some headline where a judge made a hospital prescribe.
I saw that.
Did you see? I don't know how this is legal. I want to get to a legal expert that can understand.
That was my knee-jerk thought as well.
So guy comes in and says, "Give me ivermectin," or his wife says, "Give my husband ivermectin," whatever the shit's called, and we got even a prescription from a doctor, and the hospital's like, "We are not giving you that treatment. I don't care what doctor you got." And then a court says you have to give them that treatment, and it's
my first thought
I'm very
was
confused as to how
whoever the prescribing physician is, I would hold my damn ground, because there's no way that would possibly stand up, because at that point, why don't we just have judges in charge of medicine? I'm really astonished by that one. I got to try to get to the bottom of what the precedent is
for judges prescribing medicine. Well, for years, they sentenced people to jail time for taking the medicine, which I love the most. A marijuana joke.
Yay,
well,
I squeezed
Meghan,
one in, and it wasn't even in the chip ice cream phase. Who knew?
had it work in a weed bit. All right. Well, we'll talk again soon, I guess. But I really appreciate your time as always.
No, thanks for always asking the good questions and conversing and letting me wander and make up parallel universe versions of me. Anyway.
I love that. That was awesome. All right. There you go, Meghan May, Dr. Meghan May. Everybody listen to Meghan May. What's wrong with me? I don't know why it's late. I haven't even had a drink. So go follow Meghan on Twitter at Meghan May. It's an H in Meghan. I should fight with her about that. That really is, talk about crazy. An H in the name Meghan, I don't agree. I do not think it should be there, and I should have taken that up with her, and I will in the future. I might just attack her on Twitter over it, actually. So always great to talk with her. I really appreciate that she's part of our community and a supporter and a listener, and always fun speaking with her. Thanks again, of course, to Tim Wise. Go follow him. Let him know you heard him here on the show. Read a review of the show on Apple. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited to be talking with Eric Siegel on tomorrow's episode and more. Looking forward to that. So thank you very much for supporting me. Sign up for a subscription, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Take it away, John Carroll. Love you guys.
It's time to go to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see them flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on.